Something to keep in mind about this ruling is that it actually doesn't open the door to all compensation for players. This is just limited to education-related expenses and saying that the NCAA can't restrict those. That's a pretty broad area. That can be everything from laptops and iPads all the way up to like paid internships. But it still is not, hey, we're just going to let you go get a sponsorship with a car dealership yet. But the really important thing is I think they opened the door for that to come down the line. And that's what's worth watching over the next couple of years. Well, I think the problem is there's a lot of restrictions on how much you can give a player. There's sports like baseball where you can't even give full scholarships out to all of the players. A lot of them are on partial scholarships. A lot of things people don't realize about college athletics. And it's also cost of living. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects that go into this that when people say, oh, college athletes already get a free education, I don't think they really understand what a full cost of education might be and how there's been restrictions on that for a while now. So a lot of it now is coming down to let's open things up a bit more. And the big problem, Courtney, is that the amount of money in college athletics has grown exponentially over the last 20 years. With the SEC network, with the Big Ten network, you've had athletic budgets double, triple in some cases. Athletes are still essentially getting the same compensation package that they got 25, 30 years ago. And the courts have now started to say that's not something that you can continue to do, NCAA. You have to find a different way that's a little more equitable. Right now, when we talk about something like name, image, and likeness and the ability for athletes to profit off of their image or their name, that's going to be decided at the state level, it looks like, because the schools and the NCAA have not come up with any kind of plan for how to address the different laws that are out there. And so in the short term, that might be on a state-by-state basis. And if Florida as a state has passed a law that's really open and allows athletes to get sponsorships and do a bunch of different things, and it's more open than Mississippi's laws are or Louisiana's laws are, you could have a situation where Florida State and UF have recruiting advantages over schools in other states that don't have those laws. We did see Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, along with a couple of other commissioners, come out and essentially advise the NCAA and its member schools to be less restrictive on coming up with decisions for name, image, and likeness and for overall compensation. That's going to be interesting to watch, because if the schools can decide it individually, then essentially at that point, you're going to have a lot more freedom for schools to decide what direction they want to go with things. The other thing I'll say on this is that what's next in this process is going to be more lawsuits against the NCAA saying, well, you can't restrict athletes from holding a job outside of their duties as a player. You can't restrict them from getting compensated for doing X, Y, and Z. And now it's up to the NCAA to defend themselves in court. And essentially, the Supreme Court gave a roadmap to anybody that wants to file a lawsuit saying, here's how you would sue the NCAA and win. One of the big questions that, again, is going to have to be decided in court is whether schools would have the ability to pay athletes at different levels, or if Title IX would say, well, you have to pay a female athlete on the rowing team the same that you would pay a college football player. I don't think anybody really knows what the answer to that is, because Title IX doesn't necessarily work that way. But it's, again, something that the courts have to decide. What's going to be interesting is less what the schools decide to directly pay athletes if we end up at that point, and more what the schools allow outside entities to pay athletes would be. And that might be a situation where one school decides that they have a certain set of rules and another school decides that they have other rules besides that. You're going to have a lot of questions about, can a player be sponsored by a casino, or can a player be sponsored by, a company that sells alcohol, which sounds like something we wouldn't want in college sports, and yet those companies are already sponsoring college athletic departments. They're already in that space. So I think there's a lot of really confusing aspects to this that either schools themselves are going to have to make rules on, or the courts are going to have to decide what can and cannot be done. I think it affects it quite a bit, because most schools are going to pitch recruits on the idea that you're not just going to come and play sports, you're going to come and have the potential to increase earnings and have earnings outside of what you're doing on the field or on the court. And if you're in a state that doesn't have any laws on name, image, and likeness, or on the ability to earn money, or if you're playing for a school that says, well, we just don't let our athletes do that, you're probably going to look somewhere else to go play, because at the end of the day, you're looking for the best opportunity for you as an athlete. And you may really like a school, but if they come out and, as some schools have said, I don't know if they were really serious about this, and said, well, if our athletes are making money, then we don't want any part of that, and we'll just drop down to Division III. That's not probably going to happen. And I think what you'll see very quickly, if schools start losing recruits because they have better commercial opportunities at other schools, you'll start to see those schools start to fall in line and come up with their own plans to try to give athletes those opportunities. Probably about 20 years overdue. And I'd say that from this perspective. If you go back and look at athletic budgets in the 1980s, even the 1990s, they just weren't this far out of whack. You still had a lot of head coaches for major college programs that were making about as much as college professors were making during that time period. Now, that's definitely not the case. You've got baseball coaches making $1 million a year. You've got football coaches making $4 or $5 million a year. And the amount of money that has come into the system over the course of the last 20 years needed to have some kind of an internal correction to the model. And it never came. The NCAA essentially just kept punting the issue down the field, hoping that by the time they needed to do something about it, they'd come up with a solution, and they never really did. And so I think what you're going to see right now is kind of a Wild West scenario over the next few years as things reset themselves. But to me, the changes needed to happen around the year 2000. That was really when a lot of money came into college athletics, and the playing field fundamentally changed. I don't think it's completely changed it yet, because ultimately, even though the Supreme Court ruled 9-0 in favor of Alston, and even though Justice Kavanaugh wrote a pretty scathing critique of the NCAA's model, we haven't actually seen anything really change yet, other than educational, supplements and compensation. What's going to happen, though, is now both player advocates and schools that want to get advantages in this space are going to push the envelope. And so that's where I think this was a momentous day yesterday, because it essentially opens up the playing field. And so I think over the next 5 years or so, you're going to start to see some changes. I don't think it's going to ruin college sports. I don't even think it's going to fundamentally change that much of what's going on in college sports. I think a lot of compensation happens for athletes without us knowing about it, or it being public knowledge. Maybe some of that starts to come above the surface. And I think that's probably a good thing for everybody involved.